Dead Man's Hand, the last deal of Wild Bill Hickok. The Dakota Territory sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, merciless and unrelenting as it cast long shadows through the dusty windows of Nuttal and Mann Saloon. August 2, 1876, was fixing to be another scorcher in Deadwood, the kind of day where a man's thoughts turned naturally to whiskey and cards. James Butler Hickok, known to friend and foe alike as Wild Bill, had been nursing both since noon. The famous lawman's long hair hung like a dark curtain around his shoulders, showing more grey these days than he cared to admit. His eyes, still sharp as a rattler's despite his failing vision, scanned the saloon with the practiced wariness of a man who'd survived more than his share of lead-spitting disagreements. 20 years of marshalling, gunfighting, and scouting had taught him never to sit with his back to the door, but today, fate had dealt him a poor hand before the cards were even shuffled. The only seat available at the poker table backed up against the entrance. Wild Bill had hesitated, his gut churning like a horse's hooves in mud. Twice he'd asked to switch seats, but Captain William Massey had refused to budge, comfortable in his chair facing the door. "Ain't no man here gonna shoot you in the back, Bill," Massey had drawled, dealing another hand. "Your reputation's worth more than the gold in these hills." Mann, the saloon's co-owner, watched from behind the bar as he wiped down glasses with a rag that had seen better days. He'd noticed how Wild Bill's hands had developed a slight tremor lately, though they steadied right quick when wrapped around his navy Colts. The legendary gunfighter wasn't the man he used to be, everyone could see that, but there wasn't a soul in Deadwood fool enough to say it to his face. The poker game had been going for hours, the players trading stories as freely as they traded chips. Wild Bill had been telling tales of his days as Marshal of Abilene, Kansas, where he'd tamed the wildest cow town in the West. His voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom, like boot leather worn smooth by too many miles. "Remember, boys," he'd said, shuffling the deck with hands that had sent 27 men to their maker, "in this game, same as gunfighting, you got to read a man's eyes. That's where the truth lives, clear as a mountain stream or muddy as the Missouri in springtime." The other players, Charles Rich, Carl Mann, and Captain Massey, nodded sagely, though they'd heard it all before. Wild Bill's reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm, and his words carried the authority of a man who'd lived enough for 3 lifetimes. The batwing doors creaked, and a gust of hot air carried the stench of unwashed bodies and horse manure from the street. Bill's shoulders tensed. He couldn't see who'd entered, and that fact gnawed at him like a wolf at a bone. The hair on the back of his neck stood up straighter than a teetotaling preacher. Jack McCall slouched in, though few paid him any mind. He was just another mining camp drifter, the kind that blew through Deadwood like tumbleweeds, staying only long enough to lose their dust or find trouble. The day before, Wild Bill had taken pity on him at the poker table, giving him enough money for breakfast when he'd lost his stake. It was the kind of gesture that had earned Hickok as many friends as enemies over the years. The cards whispered across the green felt like secrets being told. Wild Bill's hands cradled a pair of black aces and a pair of black eights, with the Queen of Hearts riding along as lonely as a coyote's howl. The Dead Man's Hand, though it wouldn't earn that name until after what happened next. McCall moved like a rattler in the grass, silent and purposeful. The few who noticed him didn't see the navy Colt in his hand until it was too late. The report of the pistol crashed through the saloon like summer lightning, and Wild Bill Hickok, scout, lawman, legend, pitched forward onto the table, his blood-turning playing cards crimson. The Dead Man's Hand scattered across the felt like fallen leaves in autumn. In that moment, as his life leaked out onto the poker table, Wild Bill Hickok became more than a man. He became a legend, a story told in saloons and around campfires, a cautionary tale about watching your back and reading a man's eyes. The news spread through Deadwood faster than a prairie fire. "Wild Bill's been killed," they whispered, the words carrying the weight of something fundamental changing in the West. It was as if the territory itself knew that an era was ending, that the wild days were giving way to something else, something more civilized but less free. Colorado Charlie Utter, Bill's friend and sometime partner, took charge of the burial arrangements. They laid Wild Bill to rest in Deadwood's Boot Hill, where the pine box that held him seemed too small for a man who'd loomed so large in life. Charlie had a wooden marker carved that read, "Wild Bill, J.B. Hickok, killed by the assassin Jack McCall in Deadwood, Black Hills, August 2d, 1876. Pard, we will meet again in the happy hunting ground to part no more. Goodbye, Colorado Charlie, C. H. Lutter. The story might have ended there, but the West had its own peculiar sense of justice. McCall fled but was caught in Yankton, tried, and hanged for his cowardly deed. They say he went to the gallows yellow as prairie grass in winter, nothing like the man he'd shot in the back. Years passed, and Deadwood grew from a mining camp into a proper town. The old-timers, their beards gone white as mountain snow, would tell anyone who'd listen about the day Wild Bill Hickok died. They'd speak of how he'd known something was wrong, how his instincts had been screaming like a spooked Mustang, but fate had backed him into a corner surer than any gunfighter ever had. In time, the story of Wild Bill's death became more than just a tale of murder. It became a symbol of the changing West, where a man's word and his gun hand were giving way to laws written on paper instead of carved by lead. The dead man's hand became a symbol too, a reminder that even the fastest gun, the keenest eye, and the steadiest nerve couldn't outshoot destiny. They say the ghost of Wild Bill still haunts that old saloon site, forever playing that last hand of poker, forever watching the door he couldn't see. Some claim that on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through Deadwood streets like a dying man's last words, you can hear the shuffle of cards and the click of poker chips, and if you listen real careful, you might catch the echo of Wild Bill's voice, still teaching that final lesson about reading a man's eyes. The truth of it? Well, that's buried deeper than Wild Bill himself, lost in the mists of time like so many other tales of the American West. But one truth remains clear as a mountain morning: James Butler's Wild Bill Hickok died as he lived, a legend in his own time, a man whose story would be told and retold around countless campfires and saloon tables, each telling adding another layer to the myth, like rings in an old oak tree. In the end, perhaps that's what Wild Bill would have wanted. Not the bullet in the back, mind you, but the story that grew from it. A story that reminded folks that even the mightiest could fall, that fate was more mysterious than the deepest canyon in the Black Hills, and that a man's reputation could outlive his mortal coil like the longest shadow at sunset. The day they buried Wild Bill, they say a storm rolled in from the hills, the kind that turns day to night and makes men think about their sins. The thunder sounded like distant gunfire, and the lightning split the sky like a poker player splitting aces. Nature itself seemed to be tipping its hat to the passing of a legend, sending him off with a display worthy of his larger-than-life reputation. Colorado Charlie stood at the grave long after the others had gone, his hat in his hands, watching the storm rage above Boot Hill. He knew, better than most, that they'd just buried more than a man, they'd buried a piece of the Old West itself. The frontier was changing, civilizing, and Wild Bill's death was just another sign that the wild days were numbered, counted out like cards in a deck. As for that last hand, the dead man's hand, it became a symbol of bad luck, a harbinger of doom in gambling halls across the territory. No player worth his salt wanted to draw those cards, those black aces and black eights, with that lonely queen of hearts keeping them company. They said it was cursed, marked by death itself, though any old-timer worth his whiskey would tell you it wasn't the cards that killed Wild Bill, it was turning his back on the door, something he'd sworn never to do. In the years that followed, Deadwood grew respectable, or at least as respectable as a town born in sin and raised on gold dust could become. The wooden sidewalks gave way to concrete, the canvas tents to proper buildings, and the sound of gunfire was replaced by the whistle of steam engines and the chatter of telegraph keys. But in the quiet corners, in the shadows of progress, the legend of Wild Bill lived on, passed down like a family heirloom, polished smooth with each telling. They say every man's got to die somewhere, sometime. Wild Bill Hickok died in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, on a hot August afternoon, with a poker hand that would become famous and a bullet he never saw coming. But legends? Legends don't die. They live on in the stories we tell, in the lessons we learn, and in the way we remember those who walked before us, tall and proud, into the pages of history. And so the tale of Wild Bill's last deal continues to be told, a reminder of a time when the West was wild and men lived and died by the speed of their draw and the truth in their eyes. It's a story of fate and folly, of pride and punishment, of a legend brought low by a coward's bullet, but most of all, it's a story of the Old West itself, when every day could be your last, and the only guarantees were death, taxes, and the fact that somewhere, someone was shuffling a deck of cards and dealing out destiny. The sun still beats down on Deadwood, though the town Wild Bill knew is long gone. But if you stand in the right spot, at the right time, with the right kind of eyes, you might just catch a glimpse of what used to be a time when giants walked the earth in boots and spurs, when a man's word was his bond, and when Wild Bill Hickok ruled the poker tables and gun fights with equal skill, before that fateful day when the dead man's hand showed its face for the very first time. If you are enjoying the Western Echoes, Cowboy Tales Unleashed channel, hit the subscribe button for future posts.